In Africa, it's quite difficult to estimate the amount of amputees because quite often hospital records aren't kept, so people can have amputations and that's not been recorded. However, the World Health Organization thinks there is around 4.5 million amputees across Africa. And in sub-Saharan Africa, which is where we focus, we think probably 3.5 million are there. In Africa, there are many causes of amputation, just like there are in the UK. The most common that we've found so far is road accidents and diabetes. There's also some that are quite specific to Africa, such as certain snake bites or certain practices within local kind of bush doctors that can result in amputation. People often ask me if it's due to landmines or problems in war, but we actually find that it's quite rare. It's less than 1% of people will actually turn up at a prosthetic centre due to those reasons. In the countries we work, which are mostly in West Africa and the developing countries in East Africa, we find that about 80% of amputees don't have access to any prosthetic legs at all. It's only the richest few that are able to afford a prosthetic leg. So the ones we send are specifically for the people that can't afford it. And we'll give them to mobility centres that have the tools and expertise to adapt the legs for these new patients. So we're hoping that more and more amputees will have this support. The support offered should go further as well. They need to have physiotherapy and they also need help reintegrating into society after an amputation. So being part of a support group, being taught how to use the leg, being helped with business training. A lot of people are manual labourers that lose a leg, and sometimes it's quite difficult to go back into manual labour as an amputee, even with a prosthetic leg. So helping people start new businesses that can get them an income without them having to be on their feet all the time is quite important too. So part of my role is to help set up these support groups and help amputees find this independence. Losing a leg can be one of the most traumatic things that can happen in somebody's life. Quite often they say it's like their world has ended and they think they'll never be the same again. I've spoke with people that have been stigmatised because of their disability in Africa. It seems to be quite common in some of the countries we work. There's also a sense of uselessness because they could once do things that they can no longer do, and it's often with amputation been taken away from them quite quickly. It can be, 1 minute you're quite happily going to school and the next minute you're in some serious accident and your whole life's turned around. And I'm sure that's the same anywhere in the world when people lose a limb. But in Africa it's especially sad because people don't know that they have access to support like they do in other parts of the world. In every country it's quite different depending upon what support's available. In Gambia, where we've been working for a few years, the mobility centre is now quite well established and there's a physiotherapy unit. In other African capital cities, there seems to be the same kind of setup. But regarding emotional supports, we find that to be quite lacking. So somebody might be able to receive a prosthetic leg, but then the support that goes alongside that, the physiotherapy and that kind of thing, needs work. So many hospitals in Africa will get in touch with us wanting legs, and we have quite a rigorous vetting process that checks that they have the right qualifications, tools, centre, and that we can ensure that they will give the legs to the poorest of amputees without a charge for the components that we send. We also will want to supply hospitals in the poorest regions. So we look at the United Nations Development Index, for example, and we want to choose the ones on the lower end of the scale. So it's quite unlikely we'd send equipment to hospitals in the very north of Africa or the very south of Africa. It's more countries in West Africa and some in East Africa that we send to. We recognise that it would be much better from a sustainable point of view if limbs could be made in country. If there were manufacturers, for example, in Senegal or Gambia or Sierra Leone that could make the legs. But at the minute there aren't, and that's something that Legs for Africa would love to look to as an opportunity in the future. So for now, all of these components are just trying to sort out the people that are currently amputated that need a prosthetic leg. So the cost of the leg is different in every country we supply parts to. The condition is that the parts are always given freely by the mobility centre, but dependent upon the local culture or climate or whatever, it depends upon the cost for the amputee. So sometimes the prosthetist will take a wage, or there'll be other materials that are needed to create a leg. So for example, the socket part will need certain resins and bandages and things that we don't supply. So they'll need to be bought. In a hospital like the one in Gambia, the government pay for that kind of thing and the wages. So a leg is free. But in other hospitals we supply, for example, some in Uganda, there'll be a small charge for these things and to cover the other costs. But we try and say that the most somebody should ever pay for a leg is the equivalent of £40. One of the most common questions we get asked is, would people not prefer to have a darker skin tone of feet delivered, for example? So this is kind of the average foot we'd send out, and as you can see, it's of a lighter skin tone. When I was recently in Gambia, we had a bit of a survey of a lot of people that had received legs, and we asked them this question. And a lot of people, it turns out, would often wear trousers and shoes anyway, so it wouldn't matter. People want to cover up the fact that they've got a prosthetic leg, so the skin tone of the foot doesn't matter so much. Also, there are some sprays available that can spray it to different skin tones, so if requested, we can send these spray cans out also.